Hello there. Welcome to the Constitution Study. My name is Paul Engel, and we are here to return the Constitution to we the people. If you are new to this podcast, well, I thank you. I hope you'll thank whoever sent you this way or whoever you found us. Let them know this is where we are going to learn more about the Constitution, learn how to read it ourselves. If you're a returning listener, well, thank you. I do track the numbers, and I'm glad to see as people come back and participate in the study itself. You know, it's one thing for me to be writing the blog posts and the book and posting these podcasts. So please let me know you're involved. Let me know what you're thinking. Head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You can either post a comment on this episode. You can ask a question. I love questions. In fact, today we're going to talk about a question. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think about what's going on. By all means, sign up for the mailing list. You'll get notified as things change, as new events come up. You'll get a copy of my essay, How the 16th and 17th Amendment Destroyed the Republic. And if you are so inclined, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Today we have a special episode. This is actually based on a question from a gentleman by the name of Steve C. Steve C., thank you for the question. He asked what my thoughts were whether or not we had another civil war coming. And he sent me a link to a Rasmussen report. And in this report, they found that 31% of the people surveyed think a civil war is likely within the next 5 years. And while this isn't exactly constitutional, I think it is an important question. It is something we're concerned about. It's something we should be aware about and not simply ignore. When I was running the Constitution Study back up in New York, just about every session, just about every night, somebody would say, well, what do we do? And that's kind of the vein of this question, you know, the logical next question to what do you think is going to happen is, well, what do we do? So, quoting from the report, it said, most voters fear that political violence is coming from opponents of the president's policies, just as they did in the second year of Barack Obama's presidency, and nearly 1 in 3 think a civil war is next. Well, this tells me a couple of things right off the bat. And I hope we stop and look beyond the headline and start seeing what it actually says. So they say most voters feel violence is coming from those that oppose the president. I find it interesting that in the second year of Obama's presidency, that's almost the same number as they did. They thought that there was going to be violence from him. So what we see are two teams. And let's face it, Washington right now, and in fact, probably most state houses, there are two major players. There are two major teams. You have the Republicans and you have the Democrats. And what I see here is that as the country becomes more polarized, more divided, the fear that the other team will resort to violence continues to go up. You know, if we look at the questions, the positions, I should say, that people hold, especially among the political class, they seem more interested in which team is in power. You know, they hold a very relativist position. If the guy that did it is on my team, it's okay. But if he's on the other team, well, then it's evil. And it's not surprising. It is kind of human nature. But I think it's something we need to observe because this blind polarization is growing. It's getting more and more rampant. And as we look and we see how people are reacting to people who disagree with them, you know, I grew up, there was a saying, I may vehemently disagree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Yet nowadays, that seems to be unheard of. Back to quoting from the report, most voters across the partisan spectrum are concerned about political violence from those opposed to Trump's policies, although Republicans are the most likely to be very concerned. The level of concern is about the same among Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated voters, when it comes to the threat of violence from those critical of the media's coverage of Trump. As I said, it's team sport now. You know, this climate we've created, it's not surprising that groups are concerned both for and against the current administration that the other group is going to commit violence. You know, we have celebrities that are using violent imagery. You have, what was her name? I don't even want to use the names because I don't want to give them that much credit. I don't want to give them any respect for it. That had the severed head of Donald Trump. Trust me, if somebody had shown a severed head of Barack Obama or Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, it'd have been leading news for months. How uncivilized have we become? Again, celebrities, and I use scare quotes. You know, as far as I'm concerned, these people have a right to speak, but they prove they're not worth listening to. You know, I was taught better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and prove it. Too often what I'm hearing is just proving their foolishness. You know, who was it? Was it one of them wanted the president's son to be locked up with pedophiles? I mean, how outrageous. How outrageous to compare the detention of people who've entered this country illegally, whether you agree with it or not. And I agree there's a blame on both sides, but to compare the temporary detention of people who've entered the country illegally to millions of people being gassed to death simply for being of a certain religion, that's outrageous. And that level of discourse is part of the why people fear there may be another civil war. And, you know, now we've got politicians promoting their team, people who follow them, harassing those from the other team. But here's the question. You know, they may think, this may lead people to think that a civil war is truly around the corner. But I ask, is it really? See, I'm no prophet. I don't know what the future holds. However, if I look at history and I look at the current state of affairs and I try to project what's going to happen, I don't think a civil war is nearly as likely as most people think. You know, the Declaration of Independence says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. The Declaration of Independence states it very eloquently. We are more likely to suffer evil than to fix the problem, especially by changing our government or anything else we've become used to. You see, while many complain about the situation, there are very few who will even take the most minimal steps to fix something. This is 2018. This is a midterm election. We have the chance to replace the entire House and 1/3 of the Senate. We can make significant changes to those who are charged with writing our laws, approving our justices, and holding the other two branches of government accountable. Yet if history holds true, only about 1 out of 8 Americans will bother to cast a vote this November. Now, do you think of people who can't get off their backsides and go vote are actually going to take up arms against their government? That they're going to suffer the difficulties and pain of actually engaging in a civil war? And if you take it, a little farther, we've become dependent on the government. As a society, most of us are unwilling to upset the apple cart because we're afraid we're going to lose our benefits from the government. You see this all the time. How many times do you see a state or local government or a school board that's afraid to upset anything because they might lose their funding? They might lose their federal funding. They've become dependent on it. We see households that are unwilling to engage in bettering themselves because they're afraid they're going to lose their disability or their welfare. we've become dependent on the government, and it's evident. Think of it this way: when someone sees something that's wrong, the first words out of their mouth are almost always, "You know what? There should be a law. There should be a law. The government should tell us what we should do, and the government should tell them that what they're doing is wrong." This comes from decades of being taught by the government in government-run schools that it is there to protect you, to provide for you, and that anyone who dares wish to take care of themselves is a dangerous anti-government anarchist. How do we expect a group of people who've been brought up being told only the government can make sure your cars, drugs, healthcare, food, water, energy, and pretty much everything else is safe? How do you expect them to stand up and say, "No, I will take care of myself. I will stand against this group of people trying to tell me how to live my life"? Even most of the talking heads who want to change government are merely suggesting that we change one group of leaders for another that they like more. This isn't civil war. That's changing oligarchies. Mather Biles, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, said, "Which is better, to be ruled by one tyrant 3,000 miles away or by 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away?" Now, you may remember that quote, or variation of that, from the Mel Gibson movie The Patriot. But I think the thought is true. Swapping one individual or group of tyrants for another does not solve the problem. It only changes who's doing the complaining. Lastly, I think people, if you think people are prepared to wage civil war, to change our nation, I ask you, change it to what? According to the Museum Institute's The State of the First Amendment in 2016, 39% of those who responded to the survey could not name a single right guaranteed in the First Amendment. Do we think people will stand up and fight for an idea they can't even name or articulate? We may be complaining about where our nation is going, but most of us have no idea where it was originally designed to go in the first place. John Jay said, "Every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they are violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them." We don't know what our rights are. We don't read and study our Constitution. We haven't been taught to be free, and we're certainly not teaching the next generation to be free. Why would we expect people to do more than moan and complain and actually do something if they haven't been prepared to defend and assert their rights? So I want to go all the way back to Steve's question, and I want to answer that. See, I only see 3 possible futures for our nation. The first, and I believe by far the most likely, is a continued decline into tyranny. Americans have shown over the decades of my life an increasing propensity to expect the government to take care of them, and I see no reason, short of some major uprising, some major attempt to take over the government, something, by the way, I think would be quite foolish. I see nothing that would that would stop that decline, that would expect the nation to act any differently. If we roll over like good serfs while the federal government takes over our health care, our tools of self-defense, and the control of our states, why should we expect those same serfs to suddenly stand up for themselves, especially in the face of an armed government? Why should those who are living off the irresponsible borrowing and spending of other people's money suddenly decide to live within their means? The 2 other options I see are revolution, either at the ballot box or on the battlefield. I believe the only way to slow and eventually stop this increasing of tyranny in our nation is by educating the people about the rights and liberties that were purchased by blood, yet squandered by our predecessors and ourselves. If people are going to fight, They have to passionately believe what they are fighting for. And sadly, I do not see that in America today. I started the Constitution study to help everyday Americans learn about their freedoms and to prepare themselves to defend them. I continue to do so that my daughter and her children may live in an America that is freer than the one I live in today. I pray we do choose to change this nation, preferably by the ballot box, but it's going to take time. I told Steve that it would probably take 100 years to go back to get to a point where we were over 100 years ago. It has been over 100 years that this nation has been diverting farther and farther away from liberty and more towards tyranny, back in the late 1800s, even with Teddy Roosevelt. And we're not going to fix that overnight. Anything that would cause that much of a change would cause too much of a reaction. But if we teach ourselves, if we teach our children to learn for ourselves, not to learn from the government, I believe we can raise a generation that will be a little bit freer than we are. And the generation a little bit free, next generation a little freer after that. Sometimes I sit here and I think sometimes I feel that kind of like Don Quixote. If you've read the novel, Don Quixote read too much about chivalry. Sometimes I think maybe I've read too much about freedom and liberty. Perhaps I have driven myself mad to think there are still those who would pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to live free and independent as our forefathers did. Maybe this Constitution study is just my version of tilting at windmills. Then again, maybe not. What? Do you see over yonder, Fred Sancho, 30 or 40 hulking giants? I intend to do battle with them and slay them. I hope you'll join me, and I hope to see you again at the Constitution Study.